go to AWS. And if we go to AWS, there's several different cloud-based environments that are helpful. I mean, one of the easiest ones to start with would be to launch the AWS Cloud Shell environment, and you could just start launching things in a shell. Now, I don't know if you would necessarily want to do a lot of very heavy lifting inside of this particular environment because it's just a shell, but it's good to know that it's available. And I'll just let this thing just sit there, and spin up. The other one that's an interesting one that's a cloud-based environment is Sagemaker. So if we click on Sagemaker, one of the interesting things about it is that if you notice, you can set up Sagemaker domains here, which is one option. In fact, I'll go to Ohio, where I have some stuff set up. But you can do Studio, which is the new version of Sagemaker. You can do Studio Lab, which is the free version. You can do Canvas, which is like a low-code, no-code solution, and you also could do RStudio. Let's take a look at Studio Lab here first. And if I go ahead and I launch this and I say Studio Lab, one of the things that's nice about Studio Lab is that the runtime limits have changed. So you can use a GPU for up to 4 hours at a time and up to 8 hours in a 24-hour period. So you can actually use this as a great way to get started with GPU-based workloads as well. And in this particular scenario, if I selected GPU, there we go, I could go ahead and say start runtime. It says, there's no runtime available. Please change the compute type. So since this is a free environment, one of the problems with it is that there's heavy demand for GPUs. I'm sure in the future they'll fix this, but we can get started with just a CPU here and just play around with it. So I think a lot of the emerging cloud spaces, one of the issues is just so many people want the GPUs that they're often restricted. The more you pay, I would say just the basic laws of economics show that it's going to diminish demand. And so the ones where you have to pay for them, typically you'll get pretty good performance, just like with Colab, right, which is another a GPU-based workspace. So let's let this thing wake up here, and I'll go ahead and show how this cloud-based work environment works. There we go. So we got this thing running, and I would say one of the things that is probably worth pointing out is if you are going to use Hugging Face with SageMaker Studio Lab, that the Hugging Face workflow is probably one of the better ones to play around with. So if we go to open Hugging Face notebooks here, you can see that it gives us a quick tour of how everything works. And in fact, we can just say copy to project, and this will actually open up. We can say copy notebook here, and we can select what kind of kernel. We'll just say Python. And one of the cool things about this particular workflow is that it goes right into how I could install things via the notebook. So the first step would be, install the Hugging Face transformer library, and then once this thing is ready to go, I could actually take a look at some kind of a pipeline video that shows us how a pipeline works. But basically, a pipeline is how you build each of these actions in Hugging Face. And in fact, then they go through and then give you examples. So the pipeline usage, they say in the following example, you use pipeline for sentiment analysis, pip install Torch, pip install TensorFlow. So from transformers, import pipeline. Here we go. Here's a good example. Let's go ahead and run this. So this is going to use the CPU for now. It says it even mentions that it's using a CPU for it, but it does work very well with a GPU based workload. as well as a CPU-based workload. So we've loaded the pipeline, and then now we can actually do a classification. And here we go. We see that it's able to do sentiment analysis. And then we could classify more than one thing. And you could also pull other things like ASR, like automatic speech recognition. Here's another pipeline. So again, it's got to download the model. So this is another example of a cloud-based development environment. This one's more notebook heavy, but I think this is a great example, though, of how if everybody's on the same platform, you have a common reference point. Whatever it is you're using, that it's going to make it a lot easier to work in a team-based environment. And obviously, you can do version control inside of here and check files back and forth. Now, one of the issues I think that's an emerging trend here with things like Sagemaker Studio Lab is, there are going to be some times where an editor is going to make a lot more sense than a notebook. And so I think we are going to see some issues where people are gravitating more towards, a combination of notebooks and editors. And that's why things like, the code spaces demo here, where basically you can do notebooks. So you can just open up Jupyter here. You could just open up a new notebook, right, if you wanted to. But you also can do Visual Studio. I think is potentially more of what could happen in the future. But it is worth knowing you can use Sagemaker Studio Lab and even get directed to it directly from the control panel for Sagemaker. Now, another one to be aware of, as I mentioned, again, in terms of a cloud-based development environment, is we also have these other options. So we have Studio and Canvas. And so the way you can access this is if you go to Launch App, you see that they both show up. So let's start with Canvas first, because it's a little bit easier to reason about. So this will take a little bit of time to launch, but basically what's happening is behind the scenes, Canvas goes up and sets up a cluster for you. So I would say there's pros and cons to this. I mean, the pro is that it is relatively plug and play once it's set up. The con is that it could be difficult to figure out how much you're being charged because it's setting up all of these resources behind the scenes. But let's let that thing spin up, and we'll go back to some other environments. So in this case, this is Cloud Shell. All cloud vendors have these cloud shells, but you can do things like AWS S3, LS, or whatever it is you need to do, and just run commands against it. So if you want to do light stuff inside of here, like maybe a light prediction or light testing or light deployment or something, the Cloud Shell environment is not a bad option. The other one, as I'm waiting for the SageMaker Canvas to wake up, that I'll show is there's a Cloud9, and this is a little bit closer towards the world of GitHub code spaces. I don't know in the future if they're going to add GPU support. Maybe they will, but let's go ahead and say create an environment, and we'll just call this like hello. You could put in like future MLOps platform environments. So again, everybody on your team could use the same environment here, and then it's up to you to figure out what kind of instance you would like. So it could be, for example, a large instance. I don't know if it's got. I don't see any GPUs available yet. Maybe they will in the future. Maybe at reInvent, but basically, you could just even go with a micro instance if you're just going to play around with it. Leave the defaults like Amazon Linux 2, and then go ahead and create an environments. And you'll see the same trends, right? Like it's got Cloud9 access. We also have the ability to check out code. All of these kinds of things are available in this cloud-based development environment. The one thing that is actually pretty interesting about this particular environment is that it's a little more towards a developer centric, which means that some of the integrations are pretty deep in terms of developer tools. So there's a spectrum here of the kinds of environments. On one hand, you have the notebook-based environments, but then you also have the development-based environments. As I mentioned earlier, I think there's going to be a combination of the two. Now, if we want to take a look at how this all works, let's go ahead and select this icon called AWS here. And if we go to AWS Explorer, you'll see that, in fact, there's all these different capabilities that come with this cloud-based environment. So first, they do have a tool that's pretty interesting called Code Whisperer, which I enabled for my account, which allows me to do code completion. And we'll get into that in a second. And then they also have in here integrations with all of AWS. So API Gateway, which is a REST-based web service, App Runner, a platform as a service, CloudFormation, all of these different things. Lambda, you can invoke Lambdas, you can make them inside of here. You can interact with S3, you can build step functions, invoke step functions. Like all of these are things that you have direct integration with. So depending on what kind of a problem you're solving, Cloud9 is not a bad environment to code in as well. And in fact, what I typically do when I first start using Cloud9 is I create a virtual environment. So I say, here I just say Python 3-mvenv, like that. And then if we do this and we activate it, it would then be available in my environment. Now, one of the things I like to do, though, that makes it a little easier to work with is I'll just put this in my bash RC file like that. And we'll put this down at the bottom here. And we'll say source virtual env. There we go. And now if I just source, or actually I don't even need to do that. I can just open up a new shell. You'll see that, not a new file, a new shell, that we can see that the virtual environment is sourced. Now, one of the things that we could do as well is do this. We could say hello, and you can see how we could use the Code Whisperer environment. So what's interesting is that we have a pre-trained model, which is what Code Whisperer is using, helping us build maybe machine learning code. So you have machine learning code that is developed a model that helps us then build machine learning code that develops a model. So it's a recursive feedback loop. But if we go here, one of the ways you can see how Code Whisperer works is this. If we say this, we say, build an S3 list tool, like that. It will start to give us suggestions. Now, I think the first thing I have to do is do a pip install of Boto 3. There we go. And now that we've got this installed, let's actually get rid of this. If I said import Boto 3, I would just need to build the right prompts that would tell us what it is I'm building. So what I typically do is something like this, like build a function that lists S3 buckets, and then it would go through here and give me some suggestions, right? Which is pretty cool. It's a little bit sluggish because the Code Whisperer is still in beta. So it does appear to be a little bit sluggish, but you can see here, this is Code Whisperer, kicking the tires here of it. And it did do a pretty good job. It says S3. Now, it is missing, though. It didn't make the client. And so, and notice how it did this. It made S3 an object that gets passed in. So I would have to actually, maybe call this by doing something else. Like if I said if under name, and it'll essentially equals. It's a little bit slow. That's the one thing that's interesting about this particular tool, and how smart is it? There we go. So it's not dumb. Like right, it figured out that it needed to make that and then pass it in there, and then now if I run it, we can say Python hello. There we go. So it was able to list my bucket. So I think this is an interesting feedback loop for these development environments, is the ability to use things like Code Whisperer, and we can take a look at it real quick. These cloud-based development environments, if we look at the reference panel, you can see here that Code Whisperer, I can actually tweak it a little bit and see different changes. In fact, if we want to even look at the documentation for Code Whisperer, let's go ahead and pull that up right next to it. If we type in AWS Code Whisperer, it'll give us the white paper around it. So it allows you to build code faster because it gives you full recommendations. Like it literally gave me the entire function. And it also allows you to build machine learning code quicker by using machine learning code. And it also allows you to generate entire functions and logical blocks without having to search for and customize it from the web. So like I don't have to go to Stack Overflow, for example. In fact, I get better results by just staying inside of the IDE. And so here's an example of how it actually works. Is the developer would write the code in the IDE. The IDE context is automatically sent to the Code Whisperer system, which itself is using machine learning code, and then you would receive the code recommendations. Now it would also do scanning, reference tracking, bias avoidance. All of these things are occurring within the system. And we have examples of Python, we have examples of Java, we have examples of JavaScript here, and notice here that it even gives us like really good documentation as well in terms of the doc string. So the use case would be that that you're able to actually save time and effort by using Code Whisperer to generate code to build and train your model. So you're able to actually use machine learning to build machine learning faster. So this is also an interesting subset of MLOps is these development tools that are being listed. And if we take a look here and we put in, for example, like document this function, it would then give us suggestions about how to document it as well. But that's Code Whisperer integrated with Cloud9 in a nutshell. We could come back to it and do more stuff with it. But let's hop back now to Canvas, which should be woken up now. So here we go. We got Canvas. It's finally woken up. So the idea with Canvas is that you can start doing machine learning without writing any code. And there's only two core components to it. One is the model, and the other is the data set. And so the first thing to be aware of is that you need to load some kind of data set into Sagemaker Canvas. So let's go ahead and import it. And if I wanted to, I could drag it from my computer, or I could even point to a particular bucket in S3, or I could even add Redshift or Snowflake, like data warehouse solutions. So let's go ahead and look at one I've already got inside of my system here. So if I went through and I said, for example, AutoML, here we go, NB AutoML. These are a couple files that are different things. If I wanted to select, NBA data, it would show me this particular data set that's got this NBA data. Or here's another one that's got some baseball data. It shows me these stats about this particular set of baseball players here. If I selected it, what it would do is it would slurp that in and then get it ready for for processing. Once it's processed, if you take a look at it, you can preview it, and you could even create a model. In particular, if we go to preview here, and I say create a model, the way I would create a model is just, basically click a button, create a model. Let's go ahead and select this, and we'll say create a model. And then it'll ask me some questions. It'll say, okay, what column do I want to predict? And then it gives me actually essentially exploratory data analysis. So it's able to figure out the different data types. It's able to show me if there's any missing values, if things are mismatched, how many unique values. So you can see that in this particular, there's a data set, there's 1,033 unique entries. There's 1,031 names. And then you can also see there's teams. There's only 30 teams represented, but there's 1,031 players. And then there's positions as well. There's only 9 positions represented in this particular data set. And we've got height. There's 17 different types of heights, I guess, because they're in inches. And then weights, there's 89 different kinds of weights. So some really useful, there's some useful descriptive statistics here. And then again, if I wanted to select, I don't know, like position, or I wanted to select age, or something like this, like maybe position would be a good one. You can see here that it would give me some options about what I would want to actually predict. And it says 3 category prediction. Your model classifies position into 3 or more categories, and I could change it if I wanted to. This is a classification problem. But you could see that it's got categorical predictions, numerical predictions, time series forecasting. But if we just go through here and we say, quick build, real quick, it'll then go through and try to build out a model that does this prediction. Now, since I've already built this out in the past, what we can do is go back to models, and I believe this is one of the ones I've picked in the past, and it shows that this model predicts the correct position 37% of the time. And then we can even see which of the features of the model were the best at driving the prediction. So we see weight is a huge factor in determining what position. I'm assuming because there's some positions where the more you weigh, the better. Like potentially like a catcher, for example, or maybe like designated hitter. Right, you can see the impact of the weight on that particular position. And then in terms of scoring, you can also see like from each position, basically how things actually played out. Like here's the prediction versus the actual, and you can see there's a much better formula here or workflow for predicting the relief pitcher. There's a lot of them. Out of 110, you was able to predict a lot of relief pitchers based on height and weight. Where it looks like it was not as good as second base, shortstop, first base, third baseman, catcher. Like these don't appear to be as strong as a predictor. But it says if the model predicts relief pitcher, it's going to be correct 40% of the time. For the values that are relief pitcher in the data set, the model predicts 73% of them to be relief pitcher. And you can even go into advanced metrics and look at a confusion matrix and actually dive into that into more detail and see which ones were false positives, which ones were true positives, things like this. So this is also I think part of the MLOps story is for some components of a cloud-based development environment. It could be you start the journey with just ingesting your data and using a no-code, low-code tool, and you could then take this and then call it via an API. And I believe if we go to Boto 3 documentation, if we go to Boto 3, there should be some Canvas integrations here. If we look at Canvas, let's see, call, SageMaker, Canvas, Python. There should be a way to there should be a way to actually use the SageMaker Studio SDK. There we go. So you could use the SageMaker Studio SDK here to do predictions, basically. Once it's been created inside of here. So there's some good tools here on AWS that and we've gone through several, right? Cloud9, Cloud Shell, Canvas, and also SageMaker Studio Lab. And again, they all show up under, if we go to console here, under SageMaker, they show up in this left control panel here. So these are all tools that you potentially would want to experiment with as you're building out solutions with SageMaker. The one that we can launch next is going to be Studio, and Studio will allow us to actually build out full pipelines using like kind of a combination of both Canvas and also the traditional Jupyter notebook. So essentially, SageMaker Studio is a combination of Canvas and Studio Lab. I would say that's a pretty good definition of what Studio is. In fact, let's just launch it. Let's go ahead and click this, and let's launch it. And this will take a little bit of time to spin up. So you can see here that it is able to open up SageMaker Studio environment. And if we want to just kick the tires on this a little bit, we've got our workspace area. We have running instances. So these would be like notebooks, for example. These are some pretty big machines here, running different running apps. And then we have source code integration. And then finally, down here, if we go through here, these are jumpstart solutions. So if we wanted to look at different solutions and try them out, like here's a particular one that we could take a look at, the corporate credit rating prediction. If I wanted to try this out, I could try it out. Typically, the way you would want to do a jumpstart is if we go to jumpstart here, you can see all the different kinds of solutions. So they show you document understanding, product defection, etc. And you could just click one of these. Like this one might be a good one, image classification, and it's going to deploy a pre-trained model. Or we could also do a trained model, and it will actually select a model for us. Or we can actually run it in a notebook. So you've got